Well, they want to give them another headline, which is that they've arraigned a Democratic member for taking a phone call from her constituent, Jeffrey Epstein, in the middle of a hearing. And of course, I don't think there's any rule here against taking phone calls in a hearing. I still don't see what the charge is. Where is the ethical transgression? Where is the legal transgression? Are you saying anybody on your side of the aisle who had a phone call with Jeffrey Epstein should be censured?
And I will be careful in my remarks. You need to be careful with your facts. You have an 11-year veteran of this body who should know better. You have an 11-year member of this body who took money. It wasn't a newspaper article. It was a fact. She took money from Jeffrey Epstein. It's ironic that you're taken up by defending Ms. Plaskett, which is going to the Ethics Committee, but she's lost her willingness or lost her ability to serve because she got irrational judgment by taking money from a convicted pedophile.
The complete disclosure of information related to Jeffrey Epstein and his billion-dollar international child sex trafficking ring. And our side of the aisle, at least, supports the release of information relating to anybody who had anything to do with it, whether they're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or what have you, period. We insist on complete, full disclosure. This resolution has nothing to do with that. This seems to me to be one more pathetic effort to distract and divert attention from the fact that the president's name appeared more than 1,000 times already in the small fraction of material released on Epstein, and from the failure of the majority to move to disclose this information. And it is this bipartisan group that we've had behind the discharge resolution, which has insisted on bringing this to the fore, and we've got nothing but obstruction, opposition, resistance, evasion, distraction, and diversion from the other side. And now we get one more resolution like this. The resolution actually proposes a disciplinary censure against Representative Stacey Plaskett, but amazingly alleges no misconduct. It does not allege the violation of the Constitution. It does not allege the violation of a federal law or a state law or local law. It does not even allege a violation of the ethics rules of the House of Representatives, and yet they want to censure her and throw her off of her committee. This, a distinguished former federal prosecutor, diligent public servant, representative of the people of the Virgin Islands. Now, criminal justice has two parts to it. One is insisting upon legal accountability for people who do wrong. The other part of it is due process, which may be the two most beautiful words in the English language, certainly the two most beautiful words in the Constitution of the United States. It's due process that protects all of our freedoms and our rights against the arbitrary power of government and the will just to punish somebody without any process at all. But that's exactly what's going on here. Think about it. Ghislaine Maxwell had due process. She had a right to counsel. She had a right to hearing. She had a right to hear the evidence against her. She had a right to put on her case. She had a right to cross-examine. She had a right to a neutral, impartial tribunal. She had a right to unanimous verdict of a jury. And all of that she had, and she was found guilty. And that's why she was sentenced to jail for 20 years, even though Donald Trump has transferred her from a real prison to a prison camp where she's gotten very special pampered treatment, like she's in a Trump hotel. She gets room service to her cell. She gets gym privileges other inmates don't get. She gets to use the warden as a go-between with people outside of the institution and so on. But in any event, she had due process. Donald Trump had due process. He was convicted on 34 felonies, but he had the right to counsel. He had the presumption of innocence. He had a unanimous jury trial right. They had a right to cross-examine everybody, put their own witnesses on. Now, they want to take a former United States prosecutor, the representative of the people of the Virgin Islands, and without even going to the Ethics Committee, much less a court. They want to arraign her on some charges based on a newspaper article that she did something lawful. However ill-advised it may have been, she took a phone call from one of her constituents. Now, I don't think it is the position of the very distinguished gentleman that if we find Jeffrey Epstein on the phone with Donald Trump, he should be impeached for it, or is that his position? Is his position that any time Jeffrey Epstein got somebody on the phone, and he got a lot of people on the phone, that person is suddenly guilty? That sounds like guilt by association. That sounds like collective guilt. Our minority whip introduced a perfectly reasonable amendment to say, let's refer this to an ethics committee. Let's have a real hearing. They didn't want to have a real hearing. They want to rush to judgment. Why? So there can be some headline that will please Donald Trump tomorrow instead of a unanimous statement, or forgive me, I think the distinguished gentleman from Louisiana may have dissented, but an otherwise unanimous verdict of the House of Representatives that the American people want all the files open. We've had enough of the cover-up. We want all of the truth. We want the survivors and the victims to have the possibility of accountability. Well, they want to give them another headline, which is that they've arraigned a Democratic member for taking a phone call from her constituent, Jeffrey Epstein, in the middle of a hearing. And of course, I don't think there's any rule here against taking phone calls in a hearing. Now, if you want to actually give her the chance to explain what happened, then we would take it to the ethics committee. I still don't see what the charge is. Where is the ethical transgression? Where is the legal transgression? Are you saying anybody on your side of the aisle who had a phone call with Jeffrey Epstein should be censured? Be careful your answer there, because there's a lot more that's about to come out, right? So you should think about what is the principle behind this rush to judgment. I want to close just with this thought, because I know there were a lot of people in the chamber who were here when this happened, and a lot who weren't. There was a move to expel George Santos, who was a Republican member of the House from New York. And it was the same kind of rush to judgment, absolute political frenzy. And I looked at it for about 60 seconds. And, I was a professor of constitutional law, so call me a legal nerd. But I said, wait, this guy's not been convicted of anything. Well, he's a Republican. Yeah, I know he's a Republican. He was not convicted in criminal court. To my knowledge, he had not been arraigned yet or convicted of anything in the ethics disciplinary process. They just said, well, there's bad press. We want to get rid of him. Beware of what you wish for. Is that the rule that you want here in the House of Representatives? That you can just draw up a member of Congress in 24 hours or 48 hours because there's a bad newspaper article without asking any questions, without giving that person any due process at all? Is that what it's come to at this point? I mean, all we're asking for in the Epstein files is release the materials so we can check it out. They want to go ahead and censure and remove from a committee a distinguished member of the House of Representatives with no due process at all. I reject this. I hope the whole body will reject this, just like I voted and spoke against removing George Santos, a Republican on the other side of the aisle, because he had gotten no due process. I hope all of our colleagues will reject this absurd rush to judgment and attempt to change the subject here. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, before I yield time to my good friend in Louisiana, Representative Raskin, I will be careful in my remarks. You need to be careful with your facts. You have an 11-year veteran of this body who should know better. You have an 11-year member of this body who took money. It wasn't a newspaper article. It was a fact. She took money from Jeffrey Epstein. It's ironic that you're taken up by defending Ms. Plaskett, which is going to the ethics committee, but she's lost her willingness or lost her ability to serve because she got irrational judgment by taking money from a convicted pedophile of young children. And it's unfathomable that you're taking the position that you are. These are facts. You mentioned Ghislaine Maxwell. She's not a sitting member of Congress. She, as a sitting member of Congress, she has relinquished any sense of duty to serve on these committees. With that, I want to yield as much time as needed for my good friend in Louisiana, Mr. Clay Higgins.
And the chair would remind all members to please avoid engaging in personalities to direct all comments to the chair. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
I thank my colleague, Mr. Norman from South Carolina, and I thank my colleague, Mr. Raskin, for the salient points that he has brought to this debate. I also defended George Santos on this floor and opposed the means by which he was expelled. I think it was beyond the pale, and this is a responsibility that we bear in this body, is to determine the means by which our colleagues shall be reprimanded or disciplined. And the Constitution is clear on this. My friend Mr. Raskin knows full well that this body controls the means by which and the rules by which the members of Congress shall be disciplined. So we've had variances of opinions regarding, the exact disciplinary actions that should be embraced or rejected, member by member. But let me say that in this case, Ms. Plaskett's receiving text messages, this was so alarming to me. When I saw this and read it, I didn't believe it. I say to my friend, I thought perhaps it was media from a satirical site. It couldn't possibly be true, because we all know that a text message, a text exchange is rather intimate in the realm of communications. And to pierce into an actual congressional hearing for a member of Congress to receive and respond to a text message during a hearing, that is quite familiar, is it not? And this was shocking to me, that a member of Congress would be exchanging text messages directly with Jeffrey Epstein in 2019, at which time he was being prosecuted federally by the first Trump administration. He had received some nature of a sweetheart deal back in 2007 and avoided federal prosecution by pleading no contest to some level of state prosecution, where he was sentenced, Mr. Speaker, to 13 months. My understanding, he did 11 months, and at the easiest time that could be done. He walked every day during the day on a work release program. So that sweetheart deal, let me say, should be looked at. And now, to my horror, who has come to light that should be looked at? What was her involvement? Was there some involvement then? She's a good lady from the Virgin Islands. Where did Jeffrey Epstein live? In the Virgin Islands. She was a constituent in 2019. Was she a friend in 2007? During her service to the DOJ, which my friend has brought up, was there any interactions? These are the questions we have. The good lady from the Virgin Islands has crossed the threshold of reasonable suspicion, and therefore she should be investigated. During said investigation by ethics, and I would recommend by DOJ, and I would recommend by oversight and judiciary committees. Meanwhile, she should absolutely be removed from the House Select Committee on Intel. This, Mr. Speaker, is my position. I presented without note for the betterment of the debate of this body, and I yield my time back to the gentleman from South Carolina.
Speaker, I reserve. From South Carolina, the gentleman from South Carolina reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to hear my friend from Louisiana Both of the Republican speakers have said this demands an ethics investigation. I think Mr. Higgins just said it should be investigated by oversight and by judiciary, as well as by ethics, as well as by others. This resolution censures her and punishes her before there's been 1 day of investigation. There's been no investigation at all. That was the whole burden of the minority whip's amendment. It was to say, let's have an investigation, refer it to the Ethics Committee. That's why the distinguished gentleman from Louisiana and I both voted against, and we got a majority to vote against censuring or expelling even George Santos without any ruling by our ethics disciplinary body. Isn't that putting the cart before the horse? I don't get it. I wish one of you could explain that to us, why we should censure her before there's been 1 day of actual investigation. If being on the phone with one of our constituents, even an evil, sinister force like Jeffrey Epstein, and of course, he has said that he considered Donald Trump the most evil person he ever met. He said, without a redeeming bone in his body. So I agree, people can say different things, but Jeffrey Epstein, to me, disgraced himself. But in any event, people want to know, well, what were the contents of that conversation? Why was Ms. Plaskett doing that? I'm sure she's got a good explanation. We're talking about a distinguished lawyer and federal prosecutor who was in the middle of a hearing, which is something that members do all the time, is to talk to people in hearings about different things. But let me ask, if it's now the standard that just to be on a phone call with somebody establishes guilt by association, what about all the members of this body or of the U.S. Senate who were on the phone with January 6th insurrectionists and President Trump and his associates who were trying to block the certification of the election as people were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence"? A lot of phone calls, a lot of traffic going on. In fact, that's why our Republican colleagues dealt themselves $1 million cash payoff bonanza provision in the most recent Republican spending bill. They put that in there because their phone records had been subpoenaed lawfully by a grand jury. They were treated like every other American citizen because their names came up as potentially being involved in that conspiracy to somehow shut down proceedings in the House and the Senate. Now, are we saying just because they were on a phone call, they're guilty of something, we should strip them of their committee assignments? We should censure them? Have we gotten to that point? I mean, come on. This is the House of Representatives of the United States of America. Let's stick by the Constitution. Let's stick by due process.